Spotlight is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It seeks to spotlight people, places, and events from around the Diocese of Youngstown that promote the new gospel of joy called for by Pope Francis. Your program host is Father James Corda.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight. I'm Father Jim Corda. Today we're going to talk about natural family planning. And to join me in the discussion is Chiquita and Tom Seesan. Welcome to our show today.
Thank you.
Thank you
For having us.
It's nice to have you here to enlighten us on what we call NFP, Natural Family Planning. And for the folks that are with us that might be unfamiliar with that, why don't you just give us an idea of what exactly that means?
Well, natural family planning is knowledge and understanding of the natural, normal male and female reproductive anatomy and physiology, and then taking that information and using it to plan a family. Specifically, it's based on the fact that a man is fertile all the time and a woman experiences cyclic fertility. In other words, there's fertile and infertile phases of the cycle. You know, NFP was not created by the Catholic Church. It's not Catholic birth control. It's not Vatican roulette. But it's well to understand that the Catholic Church teaches something because it's true, not the other way around. It's true because the Church teaches it. God has created us with obvious signs and the intelligence to understand our fertility. And the Church is trying to point that out to us.
That's a good distinction because I really never thought of it that way. You know, oftentimes when we talk about certain issues, we tend to think that, well, this is something that the Church created, or the Church made up. But it's good to know what those background information points are. That really leads us to the next question, and what is exactly the history of natural family planning? It had to originate somewhere, and where did it originate, and why did it originate?
Okay. Well, that's an interesting question because NFP is not something that was just invented last year or 2 years ago, or even 100 years ago. The concept of natural family planning or women's fertility has been around for over 6,000 years. The ancient Egyptians knew that there was some distinction between a woman's menstrual cycle and her fertile time. There's been some hieroglyphics found that showed a woman with a vessel with red and clear, meaning menstruation, and her mucus time or fertile time. So we know that back that far there's been some connection. The Australian Aborigines, they passed down the information from one generation to the other, so they knew that there was something there. Native American women, at the time of their passage from being young women to adults, the secrets of their fertility were passed down by the women from one generation to the next. And then what I really find interesting is that African women were taught the art of taking the cervical mucus at their fertile time, putting it on flat stones, rubbing it on flat stones, and they would put it out in the sun to dry. Kind of like how our chemists do with glass slides. And then they would look at those stones and they would determine where they were as far as their fertility, because at certain times during the fertile time the mucus makes different ferning patterns. So they would be able to determine where they were in their fertile time just by looking at that mucus.
Well, it's the process is almost so sophisticated sometimes that it's been developed over these millennium that gives us a real indication that this is not just some fly-by-night thing, but this is an actual proven method that would assist couples in actually planning their family. And how do we, before we get into some more of the specifics, why is it important for us as Catholics to understand natural family planning? Why is it important for us to have this method, if you will, and what exactly are the different methods? Does that make sense to say it that way?
Yes.
Right. Right. Well, it's interesting that the knowledge about the reproductive systems were around about 100 years before any thought was to take that information and use it to plan a family. And then it was in the 1920s, there were two doctors, Dr. Ogino from Japan and Dr. Naus from Austria, and they worked independently. They developed methods for calculating the fertile time frame. It was based on the calendar, but it did not take into account irregular cycles. However, it was 80% effective in postponing pregnancy. So that was the first attempt, and it was called rhythm. And then in the mid-1930s, there was a Catholic priest, Father Hillebrand from Austria, who discovered the use of the basal body temperature in relation to fertility. This method is based on the fact that the woman's basal body temperature rises after ovulation. And it's a natural sign of the body, and it's 99% effective in postponing pregnancy. And then in the 1950s, Dr. John and Lynn Billings of Australia developed the Billings ovulation method. This method is based on a woman's cervical mucus and its relation to fertility, which again is another normal sign. It predicts the coming of ovulation and is 90% effective in postponing pregnancy. And this Billings ovulation method was introduced in the United States in the 1970s. We also have Dr. Odeblad from Sweden, who has done extensive research on cervical mucus production and the importance of the cervix in relation to the woman's fertility. And then in the 1970s, we had Dr. Keefe from the United States, who developed the examination of the cervix as an added sign. Now, the symptothermal method is a combination of the observations of the basal body temperature, the Billings ovulation method, and other body signs. And according to the World Health Organization, the symptothermal method is 99% effective in postponing pregnancy, which is equal to chemical contraceptives and surgical sterilization.
What's interesting is it's all natural. It's all part of the makeup of who we are, especially and primarily the woman's body. So that's I think for many of us in our health conscious world, it's important for us to look at natural ways of doing things like that instead of introducing things into our systems that really could have some long-lasting adverse effects down the road. We've got about a few minutes left of our first segment. I'd like to talk just very briefly, what's the difference between that and birth control? Because we are very familiar with that. Briefly, what is that?
Well, we don't like to call natural family planning birth control. It's family planning.
Right.
Well, the difference between artificial contraception and birth control is, we hear it all the time. Well, birth control and NFP, it's the same thing. So what's wrong with artificial contraception? Well, the difference is that you look at birth control, which is artificial contraception, the use of devices, pills, or whatever. That is anti-procreation. Natural family planning is, as Chiquita said, taking the normal, natural signs of a man and a woman and using your God-given intelligence to use that information to plan your family. So in essence, natural family planning is not anti-procreation, it's non-procreation. So that's the big difference. The artificial is anti, the natural family planning is non, because you're still open to life. You're always open to life using natural family planning.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but we're going to take a quick break. So please stay with us. We'll be right back.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I told her I love her. Instead of sitting on the couch, I hope to clean up.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I sent my husband a love email.
What have I done for my marriage today? It's a good question.
gave her a call and say thinking of her and the kids.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
We're going to the museums as a family.
What have I done for my marriage today?
I made my wife coffee and breakfast this morning.
It's going to be her birthday next week, so I've been spending time today making arrangements to make that extra special.
Oh, we're spending the day together?
I bought her an orchid.
Hassan was able to let me sleep in by taking care of him in the morning.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. She's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Small changes can make a world of difference. Get started at foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
Their numbers are growing. More than a year ago, more than a decade ago. More people now living in this state than nearly any state in the Union. 1 out of every 10 families in America. 1 out of every 6 children in America. 33 million Americans teetering on the brink of hunger, sickness, hardship. 33 million Americans descending into poverty. And as their futures fall, so does our nation's.
Welcome back to our show. I'm talking with Tom and Chiquita Seesan about natural family planning. You know, before we took a break, we kind of talked about the difference between natural family planning, which is natural, and artificial contraception, birth control, which is totally unnatural. So let's go back to that whole idea of artificial contraception and talk about the marked difference between what is natural and what is artificial.
Okay. Well, we really stress, when we teach our classes, we really stress with our couples that there really are 5 advantages to using natural family planning. First of all, it's harmless. There are no chemicals, no devices, no allergies, no harmful effects to the man or the woman. And if a child is conceived, there are no harmful effects to the child.
Right.
You know, we really get concerned because, you know, women who take the pill and they conceive and they continue to take the pill, you know, what harmful effects may be caused to the new life. It's reliable. Natural family planning is the only method of family planning that can be used to both postpone a pregnancy and achieve a pregnancy. And we've had couples come to our classes who seek both of those. It's inexpensive. For us, it's a one-time cost. We teach the simple thermal method, and if the couples take it from us, it's a $40 cost. All the materials, the thermometer, the instructions, their manual that they get, and we tell the couples that as their lives progress and their lives change, for example, childbirth, breastfeeding, menopause, that we're always there as a resource. They can come back to classes without any cost to them and sit through classes. And we've had couples come back who have finished up their family. They've had, you know, as many children as they figure they can have, and so they come back as for a refresher. It's natural, of course, natural family planning. We're all into the green right now. You know, everything is green and everything is natural, and it's cooperative. And the nice thing about natural family planning is that it's something that's shared between the couple, the husband and the wife. The burden of family planning is not on the wife's shoulders nor the man's shoulders. So that's...
Let's talk about natural family planning as something that might not be as popular among certain people, but popular among those people who really want to make good decisions for themselves. And I guess, you know, I don't want to be judgmental at all, but I think it's important for us and for families and couples to make good decisions for themselves. So why is that important, and how does that help in making NFP a popular choice?
Well, natural family planning is very popular among the people who know about it. The divorce rate among married couples who practice NFP is less than 5%. Because natural family planning promotes romance and communication, it helps deepen a couple's intimacy and strengthens their marriage relationship. So women don't hear about NFP from their doctors because prescribing contraception is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's been reported that some OBGYN practices as far as contraception is concerned, that it makes up 80% of the income for the practice.
I would have never thought of that, but when you think of some of those influences that have crept into society, usually there's a dollar figure that's part of that, and I think it's important to know that. So in making those informed decisions for ourselves, you know, we started our first segment talking about that this is not something that the church created, but this is something that goes back thousands and thousands of years. What does the church say about it, though? So what over the history of the Catholic Church has the papacy said about it, for example?
Oh, well, there really are a lot of papal decrees, encyclicals supporting natural family planning over the years. I have a few of them listed here. Gaudium et Spes, the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, which came from the Second Vatican Council. Of course, Humanae Vitae, the elephant in the room on human life. Pope Paul VI in 1968, Humanae Vitae came out. And it's interesting about Humanae Vitae is just a very small portion of that encyclical was about family planning. Exactly. The rest of it was about marriage, family life, responsible parenthood. But everybody focuses on that one little section. John Paul II has three fantastic writings. One of his Familiaris Consortio, the role of the Christian family in a modern world. Donum Vitae, respect for human life, and Evangelicum Vitae, the gospel of life. And then, of course, he came out with his theology of the body, which is absolutely so beautiful. If every engaged couple could just have a short session on theology of the body, I think attitudes would change immediately. There's been a lot of scriptural references in the Old Testament, you know, Genesis, the story of creation, be fruitful and multiply. Exodus, the Ten Commandments, the story of Onan, the second story of creation after the flood. The New Testament, Matthew gives us Beatitudes and talks about adultery. The Romans speaks of non-unitive acts, Corinthians, Galatians, it's just all there.
So the source of it really, if we could say, because it's so natural, really finds its source in God Himself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's very important. And going back to your first question, why we Catholics, something to that effect, it's so important to us, is because it all goes back to God. God gave us all this information packed into our nice little bodies. It's all here, and all here.
Yeah. It's interesting because we've got a minute left in our middle segment, so we're probably going to save any real discussion for the last segment. But we know that people are always looking for the quick way and the surefire way. But there, as you had mentioned, there's a very high percentage of those who are very successful using natural family planning. And I think we're going to talk about that specifically when we come back, but we're going to take a quick break. So please stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
Good.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I told her I love her.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I bought her an orchid.
What have I done for my marriage today? I sent my husband a love email.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. She's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Make a change for the better. Need help? Go to foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
Welcome back to our show. We're talking about natural family planning with Tom and Chiquita Seesan. Before we took a break, the one thing that I had mentioned was that many folks look for a surefire methods for whatever, because unfortunately we have become so accustomed to things being done quickly or easily, instead of kind of taking the more longer or the more road that takes courage. So let's talk about that whole surefire method with natural family planning, because in the beginning you did mention that. So let's talk a little bit more about that now.
Okay, well, The effectiveness of most natural methods is very high, but no method of family planning is foolproof. Other than absolute abstinence or complete castration, in other words, removal of the man's testes or the woman's ovaries. There's no guarantees in life but 3, death, taxes, and God loves you. So pregnancy is always a possibility regardless of method used. It's part of God's design. We are meant to be ministers of creation, not masters of creation. Life is a gift of God, and any child should be warmly welcomed.
You know, I like that term you use, being ministers of creation instead of masters. We only have one master. You know, we are all servants. And so there's that whole sense that, you know, I learned something new about natural family planning, but I also learned something new theologically from you. And I think that's a powerful statement. That whole sense that, you know, we are at our best when we understand who we are in kind of the realm of God and us. You know, God is so bigger than us, and sometimes we tend to be in control of God when we're really not. And so that whole sense that we are ministers, I think, is a beautiful sentiment. Thank you very much. Let's go into, we talked about the history of NFP, but let's talk about it here in the United States, and how has it really caught on here in the United States, and any sense of how it's going on historically around the world?
Well, you hit upon around the world, yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, natural family planning is taught and used in over 120 countries around the world. And it's just not for Catholics. It's embraced by people of many faiths. In fact, it was the Billings who first introduced it in China, where they at that time had the one-child policy. So their effectiveness rate was 100% because the motivation was so high there. It's an interesting fact to know that artificial methods are used when they're not needed and are least effective when they're needed most, and that's during the fertile time. For an example, the condom is 64% effective in postponing pregnancy when used during the fertile time, and the pill can be as little as 74% effective when used during the fertile time.
Yeah. And as far as the United States, well, it depends. It depends on the support that the diocese gives natural family planning. There are some dioceses where the bishops are gung-ho. There are other dioceses where, you know, not so much. We did find out, though, that Father Feit, who served on a commission in the diocese, attended a natural family planning convention in Omaha a while ago. And he came back and he said, you know, the dioceses that support NFP, their seminaries are full. Because natural family planning, artificial contraception is selfish. It's a selfish way of thinking. So you don't want to give up your children, you know, if you're in that type of thing. Whereas natural family planning, you're open, you're more generous, and that's what he said. He said those seminaries are full in the diocese where it's supported.
What's interesting is if we could kind of recapture those times where we as human beings were far more generous, not only with ourselves, but with the gifts that God has given us. And one of the greatest gifts out of families are children. You know, we could be more generous in understanding with that. That's really a nice outlook. Let's go back to something you had mentioned earlier, Tom, when we were talking about papal decrees. We know that St. Pope John Paul II wrote Theology of the Body, and I know many priests in their deliberations with engaged couples talk about that specifically. Why is that so important for us to understand, especially when we talk about natural family planning and also about procreation and life?
Okay. Because, you know, we as humans, we are different than the animals. God gave us the ability to think and to reason and to use that intelligence to make wise decisions. And then the essence of a marriage, there's a twofold purpose to, you know, sexual intercourse in a marriage. and it's unitive and procreative. Okay, I brought a little demonstration here. Okay, this is the heart. This is the couple, as one, and this is the essence of the act, both unitive and procreative. When you introduce artificial contraception, what that does is it splits it apart. You no longer have a beautiful whole heart. It's taken apart. So that is one aspect of natural family planning, that it breaks that bond between the couple. It's a very selfish bond. Yeah.
And going back to something that Chiquita said earlier is that, artificial methods can lead to other issues and problems within married life. And I do think that when a couple are on the same page and when they're respectful of one another and one another's body and one another's concerns, then greater things can happen. And I would think that the testament that you two have with your own life and married life, practicing these things, has been something that has enhanced your marriage. You would agree with that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes, very much so. Yes.
Now, in the last few minutes of our time together, what would you like to share very briefly with the folks that are with us, especially those who might be considering using this method of natural family planning? Very briefly.
Well, I think that when you look at society in general, and we talked about Humanae Vitae, Pope Paul VI was very prophetic when he came out with Humanae Vitae. He was able to see the widespread use of contraception. There were four things would happen. Number one, man would lose his respect for women. Number two, it would increase marital infidelity and the breakdown of the family. Third, it would place a dangerous weapon in the hands of the government, who would use contraception and population control to control the people. And fourth, he said that what would happen was it would give a person a feeling that they had unlimited dominion over their lives, which we don't. It's God's life, and that's why natural family planning is so beautiful. It's so simple. It's as I said, you have all the tools in your body that God gave you, and you use your mind to use those tools.
Well, Tom and Chiquita, Seesan, thank you so much for being with us and enlightening us about natural family planning, and also sharing the journey with us that the two of you have been on. We certainly appreciate that very much.
Well,
Thank you
thank
for
you
having
again.
us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Spotlight has been a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Corda.